pastor here in the 80s and 90s, and he was my uncle. So I have that connection to Boone. I also was a professor at DMAT for 7 years in Boone here. So I have that connection, so I'm happy for that. My dad was born and raised here in Boone and was the brother of Margaret Mary. And so he lived here when he was born in 1914 until 1938, when he went away to school in Iowa City, 1932, excuse me. So I have some Boone connections that I like Boone, and I'm glad you guys invited me to come and talk. How's the microphone? That's better? Close it. Now it's better, okay. So I tell you what I'm going to do. For those of you in the back, my mother used to say the back pews of the church were the bank robber section. Because, and we all, as kids, we always wanted to sit in the back rows. And she never would let us. She said, no, you got to leave those for the bank robbers because they might need to come in, and if they hear the police coming, they have to get out real quick. So we never were allowed to sit in those back 2 rows at church. I grew up in Corpus Christi Church in Fort Dodge, and we never were allowed to sit there. So the people in the back, here's what I'm going to do for you folks, even though we don't think you're bank robbers. You could be. But if you want to get out early, I'm going to give you my conclusions right now. And then you'll say, well, we got the conclusions, let's get out of here. So you can do that. And then at the end of my little talk, we'll give some more the same conclusions, and I hope they'll make sense to you. First one I'm going to say is that maybe we're people that miracles might be real, and if miracles are real, then I want to be one of those people that's open to the possibility that miracles could be real. That's one of the things that my family is talking about, what Margaret Mary has done for people when she's appeared to them. She's appeared in dreams and in visions, and she's conducted different miracles and healings and stuff. So let me say that conclusion again, just so we get it. Miracles might be real, and if maybe they're real, then I want to be that kind of person who is open to that possibility. Now, if you're a Catholic, then of course you know there's a miracle that happens every time the Mass is celebrated with the transubstantiation of the Eucharist, and it becomes the body and blood of Christ. So that's a miracle that we get to see every time we go to Mass. But we kind of forget about that miracle. So that's my first conclusion, is that miracles are real, and if they are real, let's be that kind of people. I want to be that kind of person for myself that's open to the possibility of seeing a miracle. My second conclusion from talking about Margaret Mary is going to be that something about everyday holiness. She was a little girl. She's just about to turn 13. So she's a 12-year-old girl, lived here in Boone, over behind the State Bank. And that everyday holiness, I'm thinking that everyday holiness is special, and we should recognize it when we see it. And you say, well, what do you mean by everyday holiness? You mean everyday things like you're wearing a black sweater, and she's got tennis shoes on, and is that everyday holiness? I'll give you an example. I don't want to put her on the spot, but your principal from Sacred Heart School is here. Sue Eldridge and a couple of your teachers are here. So I had an opportunity to do some volunteering at that school, and I realized that's an everyday miracle. So I had been a college professor for 34 years, and I've been in a lot of schools and a lot of teaching settings. But you know what, that little school there, if you don't think that's an everyday miracle going on in there, you should go in there like me, who's a new person, who's never stepped foot in there, and I stepped foot in while you watched me. And what I could observe, you guys would be surprised what an old, tricky old guy like me could observe in a school like that. How come the 7th grade teachers know the 3rd grade kids' names? All of them. How come the little kids are nice to each other in the hallways? All of them. I watched when nobody else was watching. How come the little kids are happy to be there? I watched and saw that. I don't want to get too syrupy here and sloppy because I'm not that kind of person. But I watched, in that little school, it's only 110 students or something along that order, is an everyday holiness. It's an example of everyday miracle. So my second conclusion of our speech is we should kind of keep our radar on and our ears open for everyday miracles, things that are everyday miracles. I have a farm. I retired from being a professor, and I farm, and I have been farming all my life. And I have cattle and sheep, and they have little babies. Well, guess where I'm going with that? When a little lamb is born or a little calf is born, if you don't think that's an everyday miracle, maybe you shouldn't have those cattle or those sheep. I don't know. I still think it is. And I thought that when I was 5, and I still think it now that I'm older than what you might think. So that's an everyday miracle. It's an everyday miracle that lamb, and if I have a lamb that's sickly, somebody might say, why don't you just hit him on the head and kill him? And if I could do that, then I don't think I should probably have sheep. I could no more hit that lamb on the head and kill him with a hammer than I could anything. So we work and try to save every single lamb. I'll bring him in the house. We'll put him under a light. We'll put him in a blanket. We'll give him medicine. Whatever we have to do to save every lamb or every kid. Those are everyday miracles. And so I think that's the second conclusion from the Margaret Mary story. Is that fair? So let me go on for here just a minute. So those are our two conclusions. Everybody got them? Miracles could be real. If they are, let's be a kind of person that's open to seeing them. Sorry, I forget. Make me move this up, okay, if I don't do it close enough. And second is we should be open to everyday holiness. It's not just the priests that are holy. It's not just the bishops or the Vatican people that are holy. This isn't going to work without my glasses, so I don't want to.
You're probably in good company, so it's okay.
Okay. Let me just give you a hint about the public miracles that were worked here in Boone for Margaret Mary, so you'll kind of know where we're going with some of this stuff. So I'm going to jump ahead in my story, then I'm going to come back if that's okay. After she died, 8 years after she was dead, out of the blue, a vine started growing at the cemetery, and the angel picture is being passed around. Who has that picture right now? Can you just hold it? Who hasn't seen that picture yet? Let's pass it their way. Can you bring it this way? So the angel had 2 flower pots on either side, and the flower pots, it was July, and she'd been dead for 8 years, and nobody had heard from her. As far as we know, nobody had heard from her. Thank you. Nobody had heard from her. And one day the caretaker, his last name was Huffman, Theodore Huffman, Huffmon, I think we have some spellings, and M-A-N, some spellings. He was shocked to find the statue was crying in July in Boone, and the statue was crying, but only out of one eye. So she was crying out of the right eye. So you can see the statue is this same statue. It's a stone statue, and there was no rain or no hint of rain, and so he was freaked out, and it cried for 3 days. And it created a furor in the town of Boone, and the sheriff of Boone wrote a report and said the people are in an uproar, and this and that. 400 people a day were walking from here to West Boone to go see the statue crying. After the statue cried for 3 days, the flower on the right-hand side that was being watered by those tears started growing a vine, and within 2 weeks the vine grew to 50 feet long. And we have pictures of it, and I'll show you those. There's only 3 pictures left in existence of the vine, as far as we know. In fact, my dad had never seen those pictures before he died. I found them after he died. But the vine grew 50 feet long and flowered all in the first week or two. And at the end of 2 weeks, it completely disappeared. The people of the town were so spooked that they erected, and one of those pictures will show, a fence behind this little angel, and they put a high wire up this high, and they hung sheets or blankets over that wire and tried to make like a curtain, if you will, for the 50 feet of the vine to protect the vine. And I think you can see those in the picture that Mrs. Eldridge has. I'm sorry I don't have good audio video because this stuff's all 90 years old. I can only do so much, right, with 90-year-old stuff. But anyway, so they tried to protect the vine. It did blossom. And the one in the other pot on the left-hand side where there was no tears never even grew. So the people watched that for 2 weeks. It created a problem in Boone because they didn't know what to make of it. The priest at the parish at that time was Father Masterson and Father Farley. And I have heard myself, Father Farley was the pastor at Emmitsburg up until I was in high school. So I was able to hear him speak about it, and that was of interest. So I probably, outside of my family, I've only talked to, say, 5 or 6 people who've actually seen the miracle other than my family, which would be my dad and my aunt and my grandmother. But Father Farley would have been one of them, and Father Masterson would have been another who talked about that miracle in the cemetery. So that's where we're kind of going. But I want to lay some groundwork before now. I can't speak with authority. When I was a professor, everything I said, I had a lot of college students, and guess what every one of them wanted to do? Prove me right? Prove me wrong. So I had to have a lot of good authority. When I spoke on something in class, I spoke with authority. I knew what I was talking about. In this story of the Margaret Mary story, all I can do is tell you the story. I don't have authority. I'm sorry to say that because she died in 1924, so that was almost 100 years ago. how do you come up with authority with something? The miracles at the cemetery happened in 1932, 90 years ago. So how do we come up with authority with that? It's hard to, right? Our family has kept some scraps, but we did not pursue sainthood for her. And so since we did not, we didn't keep records like you think they could. So now my grandmother's dead, my dad is dead, my aunt is dead. The ones who would have had those records are all dead. I speak Italian, I read and write Italian, and my sister did. My sister now has also passed away. So I'm kind of the last of the Mohicans. I guess you're not supposed to say last of the Mohicans anymore. Anyway, I'm the last one who in the family who speaks enough Italian and who has enough interest in it. So a lot of the records have come to me and I've tried to put them together and make sense out of them. We still get a lot of requests. I'd say she still appears to somebody maybe once a year. And what'll happen is there's an office at the Vatican that's called the Congregation for the Sacred Rites, and they keep track of appearances and visitations and apparitions, whatever you want to call that. They have our name, so somebody will have an appearance in New York or California. She's appeared to people in Australia. She's appeared in Italy. She's appeared to people in Mexico. She's appeared to people in Iowa, Minnesota. So when she appears, they tell their bishop or their priest, and the bishop or the priest is supposed to contact that sacred congregation for the, I have the name of it on the back of one of those cards. It changed its name in 1969. Anyway, they contact that office at the Vatican. That Vatican says, contact Dr. Maggio in Boone, Iowa, which used to be my dad. But my dad's been dead for 16 or 18 years. So there's two Dr. Maggios left, me and my brother Matt at Fort Dodge, who's a dentist there. So he gets some of the contacts and I get some of them. Somehow the post office who finds us, if they write Margaret Mary, the post office, don't ask me how that works, has contacted us in that way. So have the bishops and so have priests. Sometimes people will say that in the vision, she told them that her name was Margaret Mary from Boone, Iowa. And she'll tell them that. So there's a lot of, if you would ask me, how do they contact you? How do they know about you? I don't know. I've been contacted by people, I don't know how they found me. My brother Matt at Fort Dodge, same way, and my dad before him. So they somehow contact us and say, and they want to know about it. People have told them, well, you're crazy. She didn't really appear to you. What they want us to say to them mostly is that other people have had that same vision and don't think you're crazy. That's kind of what they just want to tell us and say, do you think I'm crazy? And we say, no, you're not crazy. And then I don't know why they contact us. They just want us to know. And we probably should have kept better records of their names. So I have some lists, and I will tell you some lists of those when I get to it. Okay. So before we get that far, before we get that far, I'm going to just talk a little bit about what kind of family she came out of. So my grandparents were both orphaned in Italy. So in Sicily, my grandfather was orphaned when he was 14. He lived with relatives till he was 19, at which point he got married to my grandmother. My grandmother was orphaned. Both her parents died within a week of each other when she was 8. She was sent to a convent and lived with nuns in a resort town in Sicily called Castellamare del Golfo. And she lived there from age 8 to age 16 when she got married to my grandfather. So you have two orphans, okay? They decide they can't get jobs in Italy. Nobody can get a job. The mafia, they lived in the second biggest mafia town in Italy called Camporeale. And that town had a very active mafia. They dispossessed them of the properties that their parents had left them. So they had been left 3 properties, a villa on the country, a vineyard of 100 acres, and a townhouse. Within a few months, they lost all 3 properties. So here they're 16 and 18 years old, they're married, they have no parents, they've been dispossessed of their property by the mafia, they can't get a job. They go to the port of Palermo, and there's a sign in English with 4 English words on it only. Those 4 words say, railroad jobs, Omaha, America. I'll just say those 4 jobs again. Railroad jobs, Omaha, America. That's it. That's what it said on the sign on a pole in the port. So my grandfather decided to try that. So in 1905, he came trying to get to Union Pacific in Omaha. When they got to Chicago, there was a lot of railroads in Chicago, including the Chicago Northwestern, which ran through Boone, right? And they got diverted from Omaha. They ended up in Boone. So they came to in 1905, he came here. He lived in a tar paper shack along the river between here and Lehigh. They were building the line that goes up to Fort Dodge. and the railroad men lived out in the country. His wife, my grandmother, hadn't come yet. So they lived in this little tar paper shack, the railroad men, out between here and Lehigh in the River Valley, someplace, we don't know exactly where. Anyway, by about 1910, 5 years later, he had saved up some money, and a good railroad employee, he went back to Italy to get my grandmother and bring her back here. By that time, he was able to buy a house on Runyon Street, which is about 2 blocks east of the State Bank and a block south. You know where that is? It's a little small street back there by an auto body shop. Does that ring a bell? Anybody at Runyon Street? So they had a little house on Runyon Street. And that's where Margaret Mary was born a year later. So we're starting to set up, but there's some of the strife I haven't told you about yet. I made a list of it here. So they had 2 sons in Italy. One in 1898, one in 1903. They lost both sons. Sorry. Is this better? You like that better? Sorry. So they lost 2 sons. So they had only 2 children, and both of them died shortly after birth. So now you have a couple that ends up in Boone. They have the good news is they now have a house and a railroad job. Excuse me. That's the good news, right? But they've lost 2 sons in Italy. They had no job in Italy. The mafia took all 3 of their properties in Italy. We still know what those properties are, by the way, and I've been to visit them. And one of the properties is back in the Maggio family, but not our branch, so another one somehow got their hands on it. Italy doesn't have a system of deed and title, so you can't protect your title. If the mafia comes to you and just says, your house now belongs to me, then what do you suppose? Your house belongs to me. So it doesn't have that like America. That was one of the great geniuses of America, was that when my grandfather came here, when he saved up enough money to buy the house on Runyon Street, he got a deed and a title. And the sheriff would protect that, and he could get a lawyer to protect it, and the county courthouse would protect it. Just like with all of us here. So anyway, they came here. So they had a lot of strife in their life. When they had Margaret Mary, she was born, she was not healthy. She was not a healthy girl. So her whole life she was not healthy. And I made a list of the things that might have been wrong with her. You'd be surprised for a girl that died when she was not quite 13. She had whooping cough, onset at age 1, scarlet fever, onset at age 4, a leaky heart valve, onset at age 5, inflammation of the heart, labored breathing, joint stiffness, neck and shoulder were immobile. She was semi-paralyzed, could not move very well. Her feet and legs were swollen. She was unable to hold up her head for the last 7 months of her life as a 12-year-old. So is that enough sicknesses for one little kid? So we think so. And add that on to all their other troubles in their life. So one of the theories I'm trying to propose here is that this family had so many troubles, you'd think they would have just collapsed or given up or turned into dust. I don't know. Does anybody else get that conclusion? We always kind of thought that. We didn't understand how they could keep going, They had great confidence in America. They thought America was a solution to some of their problems, but that wasn't the main solution. What do you suppose was their main solution? Yeah, their faith and the hope for salvation. They really did, and they were constantly in prayer. They were constantly depending on the Holy Spirit to help them through, and they really believed the Holy Spirit could heal them and could fix all these things. And they just seemed to have, been hit by storm after storm after storm after storm. Losing the 2 little boys in Italy, both of them just after birth, losing their jobs in Italy, losing their property in Italy, coming here. Margaret Mary's born, but she's not healthy. It's just a lot of bad things going on. They're a young couple. Remember, they were married when they were 16 and 18. Both of them were as orphans. And of course, in those days, there was no Social Security, no welfare, nothing like that. You had to take care of yourself. And so they just had a lot of strife, and I want to make that as a part of my theory here, that might be important in their story. Margaret Mary, though, as a little girl, even though she was sick, she prayed a lot to the Holy Family. She prayed to St. Joseph, Blessed Virgin Mary, and she encouraged other people to pray. She asked for people to pray with her. She wanted to lead prayers as a little girl, and she did lead prayers not only at school, but in her neighborhood. They had poor people coming through town, so she organized efforts to feed poor people, brought them in for dinner. In those days, they called them hobos. You're not supposed to call them hobos anymore, but they're hobos. And it was known that Margaret Mary, if a hobo could ever find her, that she would lead them to a house and then say, this gentleman needs to be fed. And she believed that that gentleman could be St. Joseph, unaware. That we were unaware that it could be St. Joseph, and that's why she would tell the neighbors and her own mother that she had to feed these people and had to feed the hobos that would come by. So she had a reputation for that as a little girl at 10 or 12 years old. It seems old beyond her years, don't you think? I'm just going to show you some little prop that we've kept this from 90 years ago. The Sicilians believe that, maybe we can have you be a model for us. Come up here. So this is a picture of the assumption of Mary into heaven. We believe Mary was bodily assumed into heaven, right? It's a picture of it, and at the bottom, of course, it's in Italian because that's what they wrote. It says the assumption of the Holy Blessed Virgin Mary. They would take this safety pin and pin it on the shoulder of Margaret Mary, and that's how they sent her to school. And that was their tradition and custom because it meant that she was in recognition that today is the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And they would put that in, and my grandmother's writing is on the back of this. I can pass it around if anybody, should I do that? Anyway, thank you for being a model. Didn't you do a good job? Should we give her a hand? Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so I'll pass that around. We just thought that was interesting. We didn't do that in my family. But they did that with her. But she was a very kind of a holy little girl, and one of the issues was that she didn't want to have to walk across the railroad tracks. Her parents had enrolled her first in the public school in Boone, which is over there west of where they live. That way they wouldn't have to walk across the railroad tracks. At that time, I checked, there was between 70 and 75 trains a day on these tracks. I don't know how many there are now. Does anybody know that? Is it close to that? So they were scared for the kids to have to walk across the tracks. So the Catholic students that lived on the south side of the tracks were all going to public school instead of at Sacred Heart. Margaret Mary, because she was such a holy little thing, she thought she would lead a protest movement, and she would, not a protest movement, but she prayed to the Blessed Virgin Mary and asked her, would we be safe if we walked across those tracks? And in her own mind, however she communicated with the other side of the world, with the afterworld, she got an answer back that said, you'll be safe. I'll watch over you from the Blessed Virgin if you take those kids across the tracks. We don't know how she got that idea. Of course, you could say, well, she made it up. Maybe she could have made it up. But as it turned out, she begged her parents, and finally they enrolled her in Sacred Heart. And then other parents in that neighborhood, one by one, said, well, if you're with... Then they all started getting kind of spooked because it was too coincidental that they were so safe. Nothing ever happened to their kids, and they were just thought, well, wow, this is interesting. So parent after parent would then enroll their kids from across the tracks. So they would walk as a group across the tracks to go to Sacred Heart from the south side of town across the tracks. So I will have to say this, we think this is a little bit humorous, not humorous, but we've actually had people contact us that said that Margaret Mary has appeared to them having something to do with danger walking across railroad tracks. And so of all the things that a saintly person could be known for, usually it's curing disease or healing a tumor, which she has done that, but we never thought walking across railroad tracks is that big of a deal, but evidently some people in other parts of the world, I probably got their name someplace, have said that. Anyway, so she had these little causes that she did, and let me just give me a minute, ladies and gentlemen, just let me catch my place here where I'm at. So when she fasted, even though she didn't have to fast. Little children didn't have to fast. She insisted on fasts during Lent of no meat. Of course, many of us still do that now. But she tried to get the other kids at Sacred Heart to all fast, and the whole school to fast. So that would be an example. She just had that kind of a mind. She was interested in those kind of things. And she truly believed that she had seen the Blessed Virgin Mary had appeared to her and told her about the railroad track thing and about other things. So her mind was very active. I will tell you this, that, let's see, I gotta get my place here just a second. Okay. I don't want to forget anything. I don't want to, do a terrible job here for you. When she was 12, she was sick, and I told you for the last 7 months, she was sick when she was 12, and she couldn't hold her head up. So she had to sit like this at the kitchen table, sit at a table with her head in her hands like that. So that was her most comfortable place, at the kitchen table with her hands holding up her head. So the priests were coming to their house to hear her confession and to bring her communion. And one day, then there was a Father Barron, B-A-R-R-O-N, who was here. And Father Barron word reached him that Margaret Mary was very sick, and the neighbors had come in and told him that he needed to bring communion to her, that she might be near death. And so he went to the house, and he found Margaret Mary sitting at the table, like I just showed you, with her head holding up her head. And she'd been sick. Father O'Malley, there was a Father O'Malley here, and he had, just a minute, is that right? Did anybody know these priests? Does that ring a bell? Yeah, Father O'Malley had heard her confession 3 or 4 days earlier, and he came to the house and he said, well, you're not sick, you're sitting up at the table. I expected to find you sick in bed. And my grandmother couldn't speak English, so it was hard, but Margaret Mary could speak English. She said, this is the only way I can sit. I have to sit like this. Just show us one more time. Put your hand in your head. There you go. That's all she could do, because otherwise her head would flop down like this. She had no muscle control of her neck and shoulders. We don't know what it was called, but she was just too many diseases built up on her. So Father Barron said, I'm not going to give you communion. You're not sick. You can receive it at church. Good luck to you. He turned around and left. Well, and we're Sicilians. We don't forget. So we still remember that. We still remember that. And then when he got back to the rectory at Sacred Heart, Father O'Malley, who had heard about it, that he refused to give communion, and Father O'Malley felt bad, so he came back and gave her Holy Communion. I will tell you that 8 days later she was dead. But that's not the whole story. This is one of those, the rest of the story things is. The rest of the story is at her funeral, guess who asked to say her funeral mass? Father Barron, not Father O'Malley. And Father Barron said the mass, and in the sermon at the mass, as you probably know in those days, the masses were in Latin. And my grandparents and Margaret Mary, they all understood Latin because they understood Italian, and that was one of the things they were schooled in. But at the sermon was in English. And during the sermon, I should probably do this from notes because it's hard for me to say this, but Father Barron broke down in tears on the altar here at Sacred Heart. He broke down in tears and he said, we have it, by the way. Somebody has written it to us. He apologized at her funeral mass, breaking down in tears on the altar and asking for God's forgiveness and the forgiveness of the family and of Margaret Mary. He said, my own sorrow seems too great to bear. He said, as I denied her the Holy Communion. And he said, sobbing, and asked for forgiveness of the family and the congregation assembled. So it certainly affected Father Barron. We think that that's a good sign that we all make mistakes, including me and probably most of us in here, right? And when we make a mistake, it'd be hard to get up on the altar in front of a church full of people with a little dead girl in a casket and say, I denied communion to her 7 days ago. And my sorrow was too great to bear. Anyway, so that's just, I might have jumped ahead in my story just a little bit, but that was her, I didn't want to get to her funeral quite yet. I want to just say one thing before the funeral. In those 8-day period, they thought the best place to take her was going to be to Rochester. So they got on the train and took her up to Rochester because they heard there was doctors there that could work miracles. And they got to Rochester, and 2 days later, before she was fully examined, she was only partly examined, she passed away in Rochester. They put her in a coffin and brought her in the last car on the train and brought her home to Boone and unloaded it. And the newspaper article said, so the Boone people must have known something was up with her because there was 200 people at the train station waiting when the casket got back. So they must, and my dad always said, well, railroad people. In other words, the railroad people in Rochester somehow told the railroad people here that the Maggios were coming back, Margaret Mary had died, she's in the casket they communicated through the railroad, I guess, as best I can figure, but there's 200 people at the station to wait to receive her body, and she was buried there. So, Anyway, let's see how I'm doing on my notes here. If you guys have some questions, you can sure stop me. I told you about the miracle already out at the cemetery, and I wanted to give some idea, about one of your parishioners here, and then I'm going to give you a list of the miracles that are associated with her and some of her causes. You had a parishioner named Pat Lynch who was here. Maybe some of you might have known Pat. Catherine was her real name, and her maiden name was Briarty. Anybody here know her? I won't call on you, but as like students in class, you don't want to have to call on them. So one day I get a call from a friend of mine who you probably also know is Clara Kostelnik. And Clara and Charlie are friends of mine. Clara and I were both professors at DMAC. And we started our work on the same day. We retired on the same day. And she called me and she said, there's somebody at the Eastern Star home in Boone that would like to talk to Dr. Maggio. She thinks you're your dad. And I said, well, has she Alzheimer's? Does she have Alzheimer's? And she said, well, she just asked to speak to anybody named Dr. Maggio because she's had a vision of Margaret Mary. And this is in 2018, so it's pretty recent, right? How long was that? 4 years ago. And she's very dedicated to Margaret Mary. So I told Claire, I said, well, I'll go see her. Sure, I'm not my dad. My dad's dead, and I'm the only Dr. Maggio you're going to get your hands on. My brother from Fort Dodge won't drive down here to Boone. So I said, okay. So I went and met her, and I was just amazingly charmed by her. She had grown up with Margaret Mary and was a friend of my dad and Margaret Mary and their sister Seraphina. So the three kids. And Pat Lynch's parents lived over there in that same neighborhood. This would be south of the current Hy-Vee, you know, that area over there, by the funeral home. Is that a Schroeder funeral home over there or something? Yeah. Schrader, how do you say it? Schrader. Anyway, and so she knew them, and she was one of that bunch that walked across the tracks with Margaret Mary every morning. So she was one of that bunch. And of course, what was of interest to me is that I've only heard the stories of the miracles of the cemetery from like 3 or 4 people outside of my family. You know, maybe a couple of priests, and most people were dead by the time I came along, so you didn't hear. Pat said, yes, I was there, I saw the miracles. So I got to talk to her about that, what she saw. She was lucid. You know, when I walked in there, if some of you know Pat, the first thing she said to me is, she said, yes, I was an Army nurse. And I said, oh, that's interesting. She said, I was at the front with General Patton. Well, a lot of people might say I was at the front with General Patton. So I went out into the little nurse's station and I asked them, I needed to know if she was compos mentis, if she was good in the brain or not. I wasn't sure. And they said, oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with her. Did you see the pictures on her bureau? I said, no, I'll go look at them. So on her bureau in there, guess what she had? So 5 or 6 pictures of her with General George Patton at the front in the Battle of the Bulge, taking over Germany. Some of you that know World War II history, you'll know that General Patton, that army, the Third Army, I think it was, took more land and more people than any other army in the history of the world in his push from Sicily up into Germany. And she was in a forward field army hospital nurse. She was a forward field army hospital nurse. And General Patton would come in, and if you remember, if you studied your history, there was a slapping incident where General Patton had slapped a soldier that he believed was a coward. He went into a forward field army hospital, and everybody was injured. They were fighting men, and one of the men was just crying. And Patton went over to him and said, what's wrong with you? And the guy said, I can't take it anymore. Today we call it PTSD. But he had shell shock, and Patton didn't like that. He thought he was a coward. And he said, you're following up this place of honor. This is an army hospital where soldiers have been wounded and fought for their country, and you're sitting there crying. Stop that crying and get out of here. And the guy said, he kept crying and kept whining, and Patton slapped him like this with his hand. Well, that got all the way to President Roosevelt and General Eisenhower, who was running the coalition of the war at that time. And if you remember that story, there's been movies made about it, I think. Patton was forced to apologize to the 7th Army and the 3rd Army, I believe. And anyway, Pat saw that incident go on, so I was able to visit with her about that. Back to Margaret Mary. So she told me a lot about Margaret Mary that I didn't know, but mostly because she had seen it herself. And so it's kind of what I just told you. She didn't say anything that we didn't already know, but it's nice to have somebody confirm it who was there. She would have been, I calculated it here in my notes, but I won't be able to find it. I think she was 10 or 12 at the time, but she would have been 12, I think. Yeah, she was 12 years old at the time of the miracles in the cemetery. And she had a close prayer relationship with Margaret Mary going back to when they were kids. And she said she had a vision of Margaret Mary telling her, don't worry, this all will be over soon. And I guess that this all will be over means the living in the nursing home. That will be over soon. That's what she took it to mean. And it wasn't that it was a bad place to live. She seemed like she was doing okay, but it's still a nursing home. She was, still 98 years old. When you're 98 years old, do you want to stay in that nursing home or do you want to go on to heaven? Well, in her case, she wanted to go on to heaven. So that's what I think she felt that Margaret Mary. I forget that she's trying to video this damn thing. It makes me look like I'm some kind of a bank robber when I come up close on this, doesn't it? Okay, well, anyway, I'm sorry I forgot about that. I don't even know which end of that is filming me. Oh, was this one? I thought you were filming you. Okay. So, anyway, Pat Lynch told me many things about Margaret Mary that I didn't know. Not only that she had the vision. So we have had visions, and since Pat's passing, Pat passed away in 2019, I believe, right? So in March of 2019, she passed away at age 99. We've probably had, 2 more people have had visions since then. And I'll tell you maybe about one of them was I go to Sicily, maybe 6 or 8 times I've been to Sicily, because I'm kind of the family contact there. And at Christmas time, they have in a plaza, they have a live nativity scene, which maybe you've been to around here. The Sicilians believe they invented the live nativity scene. That's where they have the camels and the sheep and the donkeys and stuff. And they have the kids dress up as 3 wise men, and they have the Blessed Virgin Mary. Everybody dresses in costume, right? Well, in this plaza was probably 2,000 or 3,000 people that had come on Christmas Eve to see this live nativity scene. And I happened to be standing in a crowd. It was a big crowd. And there was like, let's just say I was talking to these 2 folks, and I happened to say, Mi chiamo Marco Maggio, professore dell'America, which means my name's Mark Maggio, professor from America. And somebody from way over there heard me, like what was your name, sir? Steve.
Steve, yeah.
Somebody from where Steve is standing heard me and came over and said, did you say, in Italian, he says, did you say Maggio from America? And I said, yes. And he stops and he pulls out his wallet, and in his wallet, guess what he pulls out? A holy card. In fact, this exact one with St. Joseph on it, written in Italian that he's had in his wallet for 55 years. And this is somebody that doesn't, I said, how did you know about her? And he said, she appeared to my wife. And my wife had lost the baby, and this was in the 2nd pregnancy, and they looked like she was going to lose the 2nd baby. Margaret Mary appeared to her and said, prayer and faith, you have to keep the faith, keep praying, pray the Blessed Virgin Mary, and be thankful for the graces that you've received. This was a thankful. Sometimes Margaret Mary wanted us to be thankful, because she thought we'd forget to be thankful. Told that lady to be thankful. The lady prayed according to what Margaret Mary told her, and the baby was okay. So this guy gave that credit to Margaret Mary and had kept that card in his wallet for 55 years. And in the middle of this big crowd of people, he ran over to me and said, did you say, because I think he figured there can't only be so many, but he didn't really realize there's probably thousands of Maggios in America, but it does happen to be that I happen to be her nephew. So that kind of shocked the heck out of me in a crowd like that, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you think? And then one other one I'll tell you about in Italy, and then I'll stop about Italy. But my sister also spoke Italian, my older sister, and she was in Italy, and she went to a courthouse to get documents. Sometimes when we're trying to look at our family history, we want the documents. So there was a clerk in the courthouse, and she put her paper down on the counter, and she said, I'm looking for some history of this family, this Maggio family. I'm from the United States. And right away the clerk said, was your grandmother Rosalia, which is my grandmother's name, Margaret Mary's mother? And my sister said yes. And the clerk at that point stepped back from the counter. She stepped back and said, Margaret Mary has appeared to me. It's a clerk in a city hall. Municipio, they call it. It's a municipal building, in a municipal building. And the clerk told my sister Rosalie, who was named after my grandmother, of course. Sicilians have a naming convention. You don't just get any old name you want. So anyway, she was named after my grandmother, and they told her that about this Margaret Mary had appeared to her. So we're very surprised by things like that. People that we don't know that have no reason to know us. We don't understand why or wherefore or how that works. So after she died and she appeared to have the miracles at Boone Cemetery, she started appearing to people. So the miracle of the cemetery was 1932. So about 15 years had passed, and enough people showed interest that my family thought maybe they should consider us nominating her for sainthood. I'm trying to get the end of the story here. How are we doing on time?
Yep.
Bank robber section is still full. So we haven't enough time yet. So in 1948, they approached the Pope in Rome and asked about this, and it was Pope Pius XII, and he was a very interesting Pope. If you have time, you could look for that. He was the one that made the deals with the Nazis to preserve the life of the church in Germany and Italy. Because had he not made those deals, the Nazis, as you might imagine, were going to destroy all the churches and all the religious people and everything if they get their hands on it. He made those deals, and then later, 4 years later, the Nazis, I was going to use a bad word, they cheated him, and they went back on their deal. And so then he spent the rest of the war condemning the Nazis. So people that tell you that the Pope did not condemn the Nazis enough, you got to read some more about this guy. He initially made the deal with them, thinking that it was the way to preserve the church in Germany and Italy. And then later, when he realized the Nazis were going back on the deal, then after 4 years, then he started condemning them, and he condemned them for the rest of his life till he died. But he wrote a letter, and he said that he sent an apostolic prayer for the beatification of Margaret Mary, which meant that in those days, the way it worked was if a pope was against you to become a saint, it was over, right? That's just like in your household. If you say he's not doing it, come on. So the Pope had the authority, and but they never would say, the Pope would never say, okay, I want this person to become a saint. Because the Pope says that, then everybody else has to do what? They better fall in line. So he didn't want the process to be that way. So they issued what they called an apostolic blessing to beatify her, which is the second step in sainthood. And that letter, we have it someplace. I think it was issued in, I put it in my notes here someplace, but well, it'll be hard for me to find it now because I'm so disorganized. But it comes at the end of the discussion. Here we go. Yeah, he issued that in apostolic blessing and prayer for the beatification of Margaret Mary on January 11, 1948. So that cleared it up. The Bishop Mueller in Sioux City had to approve that, so he did. And then the next two steps for sainthood for her was to appoint two offices that come from Latin that I'll mention. One is called a procurator, and one is called a postulator. The procurator is a kind of devil's advocate who says, what if you are making this up? What if it's not true? So the devil's advocate is the one who argues in front of the canon law courts in the Vatican that you could be making things up. This isn't real. The miracles weren't real. She's not saintly. She shouldn't be a saint. That's what that guy's supposed to argue. And these are monsignors anyway. They have to argue that. So that's the procurator. And the postulator, who was also appointed, these are both appointed in 1948 at the Vatican. Postulator is the one who manages the cause through the canonization process, who's the one that says, we think it's real, we think she's right, we think she's good, we think she should be a saint. So those steps got accomplished. So she had the two officers appointed, she had the letter from the Pope. At that point, what happens is you have to push the cause. And my family knew that the way to become a saint is not like a family who just thinks their little girl was something special. That usually they have what? An order of priests or an order of nuns or of friars or a whole town or a whole village or a whole country who says we're pushing the sainthood of this person, right? Sometimes the whole country pushes for sainthood. Sometimes it's the Vatican itself pushing, but they're not supposed to. So we didn't have anything like that. It's just a family. We're just a family of Fort Dodge, Iowa. And, a few people that she'd appeared to. So my dad decided, I'm sorry. I'm trying to connect here. I forgot about that thing. It's got a life of its own, doesn't it? Okay, so anyway, my dad kind of decided that he had 8 kids to raise at that time. This would have been in the 1950s. And he kind of decided that it wasn't our job to convince you that Margaret Mary is holy. That's not our job. And he didn't think it was our job to convince you that the miracles were real. The people she appeared to, the visions and the apparitions, apparition means appear. It comes from the word appear. She had one nurse, I didn't mention it here, but a nurse at Rochester, the 2 days while she was at Rochester, but before she died there, she appeared in a room where she didn't belong to a nurse, and it turned out later that nurse came and said it was an apparition. Margaret Mary wasn't there at all. She appeared there, told this nurse that she was going to be in heaven that night. She predicted her own death, and she later predicted it to her own family, and that was all true. So she had appearances and also visions. A vision is when you have a dream or you just see her, but it's not really there. I don't know, apparition or vision. Anyway, I lost my train of thought where I was going with that. But, okay, the Vatican had appointed the postulators and had appointed these things. My dad kind of decided we couldn't push it. We just didn't have anybody to help push it. If the Sioux City Diocese wanted to push it, but they were parish priests, what's their job? Weddings and funerals and Sunday Mass. They can only do so much, right? So you couldn't really get a parish priest to push it. The priests that saw her, that knew about the miracle, that were boon priests, and even the bishop in Sioux City would say, look, we're nobodies at the Vatican. Nobody listens to us. We can't push it. So one way to do it is if you want to push a saint's cause, you can hire Vatican lawyers. And they're priests, but you got to pay the money. And there's a lot of money involved. And in those days, it would have been in the tens of thousands of dollars. So today, that would be in the hundreds of thousands or millions, I suppose. But he didn't want to do it that way either. And he just concluded, I think faithfully, that people that had seen Margaret Mary and had her talk to them, it was between them and her and their God. And that it's not our job to convince you that it was a real vision or that she was holy or that something special went on there. So he felt that we didn't need to push that. The reason that we keep getting these cards printed up is we probably have thousands of these cards printed up. People keep asking for them. Every time she appears to somebody, then that person will get freaked out and they want their whole church to get these cards, or they'll want to get a bunch of cards, and that's fine. These are the same ones, and I've translated the ones. I've checked. My grandmother was never educated. She never went to any school. She was an orphan to the convent. But the nuns did one thing with her. They taught her Italian, they taught her native language, Sicilian, and they taught her Latin, and a little bit of English. So for a woman who was not educated ever, never even went to first grade, she knew 3.5 languages. Would you say that's interesting? But anyway, I've checked the cards and done the best I can, and we keep reprinting them the way that these look exactly like the ones from the 1930s. So we try to keep them original. And they're all blessed. We never produce any cards. All these have been blessed by either the parish priest or by the bishop. In this case, it'd be Bishop Jacobs in Dubuque, Archbishop Jacobs. So we have the cards blessed, and we feel like that's the best we can do. So we don't really try to push the thing. I'm going to show you these little books. Can you just hold those up? So we have a little book that was written in 1949 by the family. It gives some of the testimonies of it. I don't have enough to give them out to all of you, but we have had it reprinted just for historical purposes. We went to put this book, some people who she appeared to said, we think this little booklet should be in the library at Iowa State, because she was from Boone, and Boone is the closest university to Iowa State, as far as I know. So I went to the librarians at Iowa State and said, no, can't do, nothing doing. There's no room in our library for this. So I said, okay, is there a special collections librarian? They call it special collections, where people have donated money to keep a special collection. And guess what? There was one about Iowans who have contributed to Iowans' lives. And it's a special collection. So I went to that archivist, who gets paid a lot of money. That's all they do. They're only open from 10 to 2. This that's banker's hours. If you're in a special collections archivist, you don't have to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I went there and I told her who Margaret Mary was. I said, we wonder, would you have room for this in your collection? Absolutely not. No, it's a Catholic thing. It has nothing to do with, she didn't do anything for the people of Iowa. She really wasn't an Iowan because she's dead now and all this. As it turned out, that special collections archivist, and I guess I'm going to go off script here, was an atheist who was from China, who had a $70,000 a year job, and her job was to say no to people like me. So after that, I didn't like that very much, because I was still teaching at the time, and I thought, they kept saying there's not room for this. Well, I mean, I'm not an idiot. I was born in 9, but I wasn't born last night. So you tell me you don't have room for this in all the buildings in Iowa State and special collections? So I went back this time to the director, who's the boss of that atheist librarian, and I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get 3 or 4 legislators who are going to hold a hearing on why there's not room for this in the library at Iowa State. And here's the names of those legislators. They're my friends. And we're going to make sure that this gets in the library. Would you rather do it that way, or would you rather just put it in the library now? It's not going to end the way you think it's going to end. So she said, okay, you're right. We should have room for that. She was a special person, and we'll take it. So I gave it to them. They put it in their special collections, right? Since then, so that was about 2016, let's say, when this little ballet went on. In 2016, and guess what? We've had another person who was a researcher who said they would like to see anything we have about Margaret Mary, and they looked in the libraries at Iowa State, and guess what? Who said that? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. They didn't find it. It's not there. It's not in the catalog. And so I thought, well, I'm not sure I believe that. So me being a former professor, I used to know how to do research, and I still have my brain. I went and looked, and guess what? And I just did this in preparation for this little talk tonight. It's not there. So the librarians win. They win. So now guess what I'm going to have to do? Get on my horse, ride over to Iowa State, go back to them and say, you told me this, and I got a letter someplace from the head librarian, because they were scared of that legislative committee. And I got to find that letter. I don't know where that letter is, and say, yeah, but people, it's interesting. So not everybody, I don't know if it's our job, but I don't think that's asking too much what is in the library. Okay. Don't let me tell those stories. Don't let me tell those too much. So I'm going to give you her causes. By causes, it means that these are people who, when they come to us, that she's appeared to them, what they had, what was their problem. And I'll tell you that as a researcher, maybe as a person of faith, this shouldn't bother me, but why it bothers me a little bit is that the causes are not all one thing. Like some saints, it's like they love the Catholic schools, and that's their big deal, and that's it, right? Yeah, that was it with Margaret Mary, but there's a lot of other things that were not related to that. So I'm just going to give you the list of some I culled out of the letters that we've had. That she's appeared and helped people that had, number one would be gravely ill children. The gravely ill children was a big deal for her, and she's appeared, I'd say that the apparitions, if we were able to count them somehow, that's the most that she's appeared to. Incurable diseases would be the next one. And the famous one of that is there was a doctors in New York that had a guy had a brain tumor, and the brain tumor, she appeared to them, and one of the doctors and all the other doctors had diagnosed his brain tumor, and anyway, it just disappeared overnight. So the guy was a doctor, and his friends were doctors, and they all freaked out. They couldn't believe that his tumor had disappeared overnight. So again, I'm not trying to convince you to have faith, but if they did have faith, that's something they could see. And it was considered incurable at the time as a brain tumor. That was in the 1960s or 70s. Strengthening one's faith would have been a big one for her. She wanted us to strengthen our faith because it's something we can't see, right? Isn't that the hardest thing? So I teach the 6th graders at my church. Some of the folks are here from St. Peter and Paul in Gilbert. You know where that is out in the country? And I teach the 6th graders there, and they have better faith than some of us adults. So their faith is they believe in things they can't see. And I go and I ask them, and they believe in it. That either means they come from good families, that's one thing, right? But they have a childlike belief in things they can't prove up. Sometimes we adults get too, like you guys could ask me to prove up a lot of this stuff, and I can't prove up a lot of it, and I don't really want to. But we get too caught up in that, well, you can't prove that, well, you can't prove that, right? But anyway, that was, so strengthening our faith in things we can't prove up was important to her. The power of prayer is big. She tells people to pray whenever she appears. She prayed a lot in her own little life, and she prayed not with anybody telling her to pray. So that's something from her life that we can see in her visions when she's appeared to people. Next one is devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and to Christ and to St. Joseph, to the Holy Family, we'll call it. She kind of acted like she knew those people personally. She acted like she knew what the baby Jesus would want at Christmas. She acted like she knew what St. Joseph was doing when he had to take care of his family. Anyway, big deal with that, and she tells a lot of people that they should be praying specifically to Christ or to the Blessed Virgin Mary or to St. Joseph. And people have reported that to us. In our daily lives, many times she'll say, I want you to pray to Christ in your daily life, and she uses that phrase, daily life. The second last one, as I told you already, was the crossing of railroad tracks, which I think is funny, but it was because it was a big part of her life, and she actually has appeared probably to a couple people, I don't think it's more than 2 or 3, who had something related to, I've been injured, I hit by a train, I've been crossed the railroad tracks, I got run over, I'm trying to cure, whatever it was, I'm trying to get better. So that. And the last one was, it's interesting because our principal, Sue Eldridge, is here, was send your kids to Catholic schools. So she's appeared to people and she's put in a plug, which doesn't make a lot of sense, because let's say you somehow are praying and Margaret Mary appears to you and says, through prayer and faith, you can be healed. And by the way, send your kids to the Catholic schools. It's sort of like a little advertisement on the bottom of it. No, I don't know. I'm just telling you how this has come. I'm an old man, and it's come to us for many decades. People would report things to us like that. Well, what did Margaret Mary talk to you about? Well, she said she was going to help heal me, and then she also mentioned send your kids to Catholic schools. I don't know how people get it. Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe they got it right. I don't know. I don't question it, right? But that's been a big deal because in her life, remember, that was the story I told you. She wanted to be able to walk across those railroad tracks, to be able to go to the Catholic schools. So those are the causes that are associated with her. We're getting close here toward the end of all this awful material. The last list I have, would you like to hear a list of the miracles and apparitions that she's associated with Margaret Mary? Just the ones I found. I didn't dig deep. I didn't get my fingernails dirty, and I've got a dirty house, trust me. But I didn't get dirty looking for stuff. If I dig deeper in my boxes, I probably would have found more. So we'll start out with the statue on the grave crying, okay? The 50-foot long vine appearing and blooming. Did you pass those pictures around?
Yeah.
Did everybody see the vine pictures? One guy from Chicago, she appeared to him. He had, it was a she. The woman had full body scars that had appeared from gasoline burns. Somehow she got crossways with gasoline and it lit on fire, and she had full body scars, the way she described them. Margaret Mary appeared to her, and the scars disappeared within a week. And again, some doctor wrote us a letter and said, yep, I'm just telling you that she had those scars, they disappeared, we don't really know anything more. The doctors don't want to say too much, but they just confirm at least those 2 details. Yes, there were scars, yes, they disappeared. And these full body scars, if you know about burns, it's not just the scar, it's not cosmetic. You can't move, your skin gets tight like leather, and it becomes a difficult way to live. So there was that one. I told you about, she appeared to the sister at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, and that sister was having personal troubles in her own family, and she appeared to her. The sister was not somebody that was taking care of Margaret Mary, so we don't know how she would have known her. She's appeared to all of the family members, including my dad and my aunt, who have told me about what she had to say to them. She's appeared to a lady before and after surgery. That was kind of interesting. She appeared to the lady before surgery, trying to give her faith and telling her that God was going to take care of her and Jesus was going to watch over her. And then she appeared after the surgery and said, see? So, is that kind of a thing? I'm paraphrasing, so you have to give me that to paraphrase, right? But it was 2 appearances to the same lady. And the lady said, I was just shocked as I could be, and she wrote us a letter and told us that. There was another person had a gravely ill daughter who was given the word that she was going to die, and then she didn't die. She recovered. Here's another one. The husband was having surgery. She appeared to him before surgery, and the wife reported this, and he had the surgery, and later he stopped praying, and she appeared to him and said, have you forgotten me? And have you forgotten me? I told you to keep praying, and you stopped praying. You had the surgery. You went through the surgery. It was successful, but then you didn't keep praying. So she was telling him like a little kid, kind of scolding, right? And the words were, he wrote us. The wife wrote us, "Have you forgotten me?" It kind of freaked them out too. When people have these visions or apparitions, it affects their lives. I mean, they're a little bit shook up a little bit. I don't know how else to say it. It does something. Here's another one. She appeared to somebody to cure their infertility. They couldn't have children, and she cured their infertility. Another man had a spinal cord disease, and that was cured, and they attributed it to her. Another person had kidney disease and dysfunction. They attributed that to her. Another one had a brain tumor. I mentioned that, the complete cure and disappearance of the brain tumor. So those are just some of the examples that we find that she had, some of the miracles that are attributed to her. So let me go back to the beginning, if I can. I don't know about that camera. That camera and me are not really friends. What was my conclusions in the bank robber section? My conclusions were what? Number one was that maybe miracles really do happen. And when they do, I want to be one of the people that can see them and believe. Did my story support any of that conclusion? Let me say that again. Maybe miracles really do happen. And when they do happen, I want to be one of the people that can see them and believe. And my second conclusion was maybe everyday holiness is common and real. Remember, everyday holiness we talked about. And the example I gave was that little school there, that gem, that little diamond that we don't give it credit for, how they treat kids and how they take care of kids, and how I would have longed to be a kid in that school. And maybe everyday holiness is common and real, and we should acknowledge it for the gift that it is. So we should think about everyday holiness when we see it. And maybe you see it in your neighbor, maybe you see it in your sister, maybe you see it in some business transaction. I don't know, but it's everyday holiness. And maybe we should be attuned to that. There's many saints and many of the doctors of the church have talked about everyday holiness. So Margaret Mary isn't the first one saying that. We're not trying to say that at all. Okay. I think I've told you as much of the story as I'm going to be able to tell you in a cogent fashion. I have more dates and numbers and stuff, but I don't think you want to see those. And I'm just trying to think what else you might need to know about her. If there's anything else I could tell you. I'll just tell you one last thing was, she came up again, so after she died, it was 1924, her dad, my grandfather, only lived another 13 years. And he died, he worked at the Roundhouse here in Boone, he got black lung. He cleaned out the guts of the locomotives, the boiler, burner, whatever they call it. And he died at age 57, which was young. And at his funeral, the people of Boone still remembered Margaret Mary. So the guys in the Roundhouse said, we're not working, we're going to go to this funeral for him. And the Roundhouse said, well, we're the railroad, and the railroad is the boss of Boone, and nobody messes with us. And they might still say that. And they concluded that there wouldn't be enough workers to run the Roundhouse. So they said, okay, you all come into work, and then you can go to the funeral, and then come back to work, so at least you'll be at work some of the part of the day. So the railroad men walked from the Roundhouse, do you all know where that Roundhouse was in East Boone? Yeah. Walked from there to Sacred Heart Church in a block, was the way that it was described to me. Pat Lynch was one of the people who was at that funeral, and she saw that. And they came in a block, and when they came into the church, they didn't sit with their wives and children if they were in there, because they were railroad men. And the railroad men, this is one of theirs, my grandfather, who had been on the railroad for 32 years by that time that he had died. They sat with the other railroad men in the church. And that was a big deal. And the students from Sacred Heart, they had an honor guard 13 years earlier for Margaret Mary's funeral. And then more students, different ones, had made an honor guard for his funeral in honor of Margaret Mary, because they still remember 13 years later at the school. And anyway, his funeral doesn't, but the people of Boone remembered her even after those years had gone by, and that's why they wanted the funeral to be something special. The whole town was worried about them, that family, and I'll tell you why. 1937, when he died, my dad was at Iowa City in college. You think, well, big deal. Well, it was a big deal for a railroad family who didn't speak English to have somebody going to medical school. Never had happened in Boone. They never knew a railroad workers family. Railroad workers were a certain class of people, and they didn't have many kids who went to medical school who were going to be doctors. So my dad was named Paul, so the whole town knew Paul's in medical school. Now they've lost Margaret Mary. Now the dad, they've lost the dad. So there's no welfare, there's no Social Security, there's no food stamps. What is that family going to have to do? So the railroad workers had concluded that my dad would have to quit school in his last year. In 1937, he had one more year left to get his medical degree. He'd have to quit school to support his mother and sister who were still left, the ones that were left alive. And it's interesting, it's touching for me to think how people thought in those days, that they were worried about, who would think about that? It's just a funeral, right? But they remembered about Margaret Mary, and they remembered about then how is my dad going to support them? How would their family be supported? As it turned out, a little everyday holiness miracle happened to my dad, which I'll just tell you real quickly since I have a minute.
Oh, yes.
So he was at Iowa City, he went to the financial aid office, he said, my dad has died, I need financial aid, I need to borrow $300 to make it for the rest of the year to support my mother and sister in Boone. And they said, nothing doing, you've already borrowed enough, this is the Great Depression, we're in the middle of the Depression, we're not lending any more money. So he thought he could appeal the financial aid office decision, so he went to a guy by the name of Dean Reno, spelled R-E-I-N-O. There's two big dormitories in Iowa City called Reno Hall, Reno 1 and Reno 2, if any of you know Iowa City. That dean was a dean, and the dean said, well, the financial aid office made a mistake, go back there and tell them that I said that you should be able to get that $300 to stay. Because he was tied for number one in the class at that time. They didn't want him to quit. So he went back to financial aid and they gave him the $300. Well, after he graduated, he came here to Boone and tried to buy a dental practice that was across the street, kitty corner from the state bank. Remember that red brick building that used to be on the corner with a turret in the corner, a kitty corner from the state bank?
The green space.
It's a green space now. So he tried to buy that dental practice, and at that dental, he went to the bank and they said, well, we know you, we've loaned money to your dad, but we're not loaning money to you. And he said, why? And they said, dentistry will never make money. You'll never be able to pay back. Nobody's going to want to fix their teeth. This is a depression. Nobody will fix their teeth. The dentists are all going to starve. It won't lend you any money. So he couldn't buy that practice. So guess what he did? He went to Fort Dodge, found a practice that was for sale there, asked the bank if they wanted money, and they said, yes, we'll loan you money. So in 1938, they loaned him money. So that's why he ended up in Fort Dodge. Why am I getting off the track? Back to the funeral of my grandfather. So I was trying to say that it was touching to us that the town remembered Margaret Mary at that funeral, and that they remembered how's the family going to support itself. So we think that was a small example of everyday holiness. Oh, you didn't get the rest of the story. The rest of the story is, so after he got started in dentistry, he went back to Iowa City on the train to try to pay back start the repayment on the $300 loan. They said, well, you don't owe us $300. He said, yes, I do. He said, my senior year, I ran out of money. Remember, you loaned me an extra $300. He showed him the paperwork. He said, no, you don't owe us anything. That was Dean Reno's own money.
Oh my God.
And he gave it to you because he didn't want you to drop out. So this is a surprise at Big State University. I hope that kind of kindness would happen today. But as it turns out, so then two of my brothers also became dentists at that same dental school and practice. So we have a long history with the University of Iowa and the dental school. But that was something that they would loan a kid who didn't speak English when he started. The nuns at Sacred Heart taught him English. Remember, when he went to school there, neither he nor Margaret Mary nor my aunt, none of them spoke any English. So Sacred Heart had to teach them English, had to get them through that way. My dad skipped the 5th grade and the 3rd grade. He skipped 2 grades, which I don't know how common it was to skip grades in those days. So he graduated when he was 16 and started university at age 16. And the nuns at Sacred Heart had graduated him through, and they didn't think he needed to stay there. One touching thing that we found, then I'm going to shut up and take questions, was after they all died and I started getting all this stuff, I told you all the materials came to me and I started pawing through it because I could read Italian. There's the grade reports from Sacred Heart. After my grandfather had died, my dad still had a sister, Serafina, that was in school there. And the parents used to have to sign the grade report to prove that they'd seen it or something. And then I think, was it turned back into the school or something? Well, as it turned out, the town didn't know what to do because there was no father in that family anymore. My grandfather was dead, and they buried him, and they needed somebody to sign. So they said, when Paul comes back from Iowa City, he's a college student. We know he's going to be a doctor someday. Could you have him sign that card? Because my grandmother refused to touch it. She was very superstitious, and she felt that if she signed that card, it was somehow disrespecting her husband's memory. Because he had signed all the cards for the first 11 years until he died. And so she wouldn't touch him. She said, I won't touch him. I can't touch him. So my dad signed, so his signature is on those, and we have those grade cards. Somebody at Sacred Heart, then probably 10 years later, or 20 years later, I don't know when, found those, and they were cleaning out their office, maybe because somebody else had to move in, I don't know what. And they sent them to us, and so we have those, which is very nice. So they sent those grade cards with my dad's signature on it. It was the same signature as it looked like when he died when he was 91, so that's 70 years later. But he signed them as a college student. I guess that was unusual in those days to have a college student signing. So they say, well, the priest probably had to approve that. But, so we have a lot of fondness for Sacred Heart, and I'm glad that it's still treating people the way it treated my family at that time. That's all I can say. I would love to take questions. I try to answer whatever I can. Yeah, Megan.
First of all, that little book that you showed, I did put a copy in the Sacred Heart Library.
So it's in the library. Have you ever found any newspaper articles about the miracle of the cemetery from that time?
Yeah, we did, but the Boone Republican costs you money to get their articles. Do you know that?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And so it's not that I'm that cheap, it's just that I haven't had a credit card and a computer and been in a good mood all at the same time. So the one we've seen that somebody has sent us is the one that where the sheriff said, they did an article on that in 1932. Sheriff, whatever his name was, Wilkins, does that ring a bell? Wilkins, anyway. 1932, that he had said, oh, big things going on there. So we've seen that article, so I know I could dig that one out.
What year was she born again?
1911.
I just think
So-
it's interesting too that like this town has so much history of like railroad heroines with Kate Shelley and her kind of around the same time.
Yeah, that is an interesting coincidence, yeah. So, any other questions that I could help answer? Yeah, and help me with your first name.
Steve,
Steve, what?
is the Maggio family still dentists in Fort Dodge? Because I think my mother goes to one.
Well, they probably do. It's my brother Matt. They've been at that same office for 82 years. It's one of
My
them.
mother's 86.
And she,
She goes to Dr. Maggio.
so my brother is treating the great-grandchildren of people that my dad treated when he first started. Yeah.
So, and in fact, she probably went to Matt's dad, right? Wasn't he a
Yeah,
dentist too?
yeah.
Yeah, so.
And that's what I'm talking about here.
I grew up in Fort Dodge.
Oh, you grew up in Fort Dodge, yeah. My other brother's also a dentist, but he's in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask because I knew there's Maggios in Fort Dodge,
Yeah.
dentists, so.
He's got 7,000 patients, and he can't find another dentist to come and help him. It's the largest non-Medicare practice in the state of Iowa, and he's been there for 82 years, and he can't find another dentist. You know why? It's not very nice to say this, but I'm going to say it. They don't want to live in Fort Dodge.
No kidding.
I'm just being honest with you. I'm just being honest. They'd have to have a family tie or some reason to do this. It's not a town that's easy to attract doctors and dentists to it.
Somebody said dentists would make money, so they can.
Yeah, a banker. Yeah. Any other questions about the faith aspects of Margaret Mary? Yeah, what was your name, sir?
Rob,
Rob? Yeah.
how does she actually appear to people?
Well, there's two ways that we've heard of. One is in a dream, and one is walked into a room with you.
How do people,
She introduced herself.
How do they know who she is?
how does she introduce themselves? She has a physical form that they see.
They see what she looks like, that 13-year-old girl that you've seen in that picture. And it's on the back of the holy cards, a little tiny picture. But what they ask her, who are you? People get freaked out if you had a vision like that, wouldn't you want to know?
Even in a dream?
Yep, they'll ask, who are you? And she'll say, I'm Margaret Mary from Boone, something like that. Or sometimes she won't say, sometimes she'll just say, I'm Margaret Mary, and then she'll have to go through their parish priest, the bishop, the Vatican, figure out who it was, and then come back to us. So it's taken different forms, but and I would say this, she probably has appeared to people. It only makes sense that she doesn't say who she is. I don't know. We never hear them. So we don't hear of everybody, but we hear the ones that they know it's tracked back to us somehow. And the ones in Italy are the same way. In Italy, they'll get it that she was some Maggio from America would be the closest that they'll come. And they figure that that's us, and then they know that comes back to our family. So yeah, it's unusual that way. There is an office of the Vatican that's called the Congregation for the Sacred Rites or something like that. Did you see that on the back of the card? I didn't mention it, but I put it in my notes, but I've lost my notes where I was. Look on the bottom of one of those cards, the blue one in English. What's the name of that?
Congregation of Rites.
Yeah, the Sacred Congregation of the Rites. Yeah. I'm going to tell you one last thing, and then I'm going to shut up too, but I want you to think of some questions before I shut up too much, okay? Just let me say one thing. So for 45 years, guess who's had a stage 4 terminal disease? Yeah, me. So I've had Crohn's disease since I was 17. 3 times in my life I've been given 2 weeks to live and told I should have the last rites. And in 22 years ago, I got kidney disease. And my kidneys are now, I've been told I only had 2 weeks to live in 2017. So Father Shedda, who was our priest, Father John Shedda, I don't know if any of you know him, he's in a different diocese, but I had the last rites with him, and we did it at St. Thomas Aquinas, so I didn't want anybody in my church to know. And he gave me the last rites, and the Mayo Clinic doctor said I had 2 weeks to live, and I better get my affairs in order. So when a Mayo Clinic doctor says, you better get your affairs in order, and they actually said, you better see your priest, I was didn't think I'd ever going to reach that point. That was 5.5 years ago, and I'm still alive. Now, I'm not perfectly healthy. I did retire from my job, but I'm still farming on a small scale farm. But I don't know that I can attribute that to Margaret Mary. What I always have attributed it to is the Holy Spirit, and I believe that the Holy Spirit is always with me constantly. I don't know why I'm still alive, to be honest. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but tonight I'm here doing this, which I'm happy to be. But I try to help a few kids if I can do some tutoring. I've been doing some tutoring, and we don't quite know why I'm still here. Both of those diseases are called stage 4, which is a terminal disease for me. My kidneys are at 8% now. So 8% functioning is very close to 0. And so I'm probably too old for a transplant. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I can attribute, I do pray, and Margaret Mary is part of my prayer life. The Holy Spirit is a lot of part of my prayer life. Try to put your finger on that. What is the Holy Spirit, you know? How do you grab hold of that? That's tough, right? Somewhere in Catholic catechism, there's a thing that says there's 7 parts to the Holy Spirit. I forget what they call those parts. I just saw it the other day. But anyway, there's something going on there. I'm not sure I should still be alive, but I still am, and I have a pretty good life. I mean, it's okay. I'm a little bit sick, but not too terribly sick. I'm not sick enough to not be here. Ma'am, what was your first name?
My name's Lisa.
Lisa, do you have a question?
And I'm not from Boone, but I enjoy Boone when I visit my daughter and I'm passing through.
You can't ask a question then.
I feel like this parish is where I grew up in Kansas. I feel it's very loving and very the Holy Spirit makes me feel good.
I think we should give her a hand for that.
It's moving in this parish. I didn't know why I was drawn here tonight. I wanted to do this last year, and I'm kind of a chicken, you know what? And I prayed a lot, and I kept getting guided here tonight, and I apologize for popping in late, but I was fighting the spirit. And I came in, and he always wins. So,
Where do you live now?
I'm in close to Wisconsin, up by the Mississippi River.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I want to tell you, Professor, I appreciate your story so much. But I feel in my heart that there's a couple of points I just would like to share. Is, first of all, the book, okay?
Yeah.
Her, an atheist, that's a label. That's our opportunity to share our faith. That's an opportunity. They have perceptions of Catholics or Christians, whatever. When labels are applied, if we're going to be active in our faith and everything, beautiful messages you're sending, why not pray over that book and ask the Holy Spirit to guide you when you go in there to deliver that message, and maybe with love and grace, not maybe, with love and grace, ask that person that God put in your path to maybe read this or sit down and have a conversation. It's only that big, I believe, you know, to maybe to read this and then give her a few days and some more prayer and allow the Holy Spirit and God to come in and work miracles, not making miracles. Eliminate that from everybody's vocabulary. It will be a miracle. You have to believe, and you have to step out in the faith, and you have to believe that faith.
I will do it. I will do what you say. It's a good, I like it. I will do what you say. Yeah.
Rock on.
Won't you, Lisa? Thank you, Lisa. I will do what you say.
Thank you, Professor.
You just call me Mark. Just call me Mark. Just call me Mark.
I came in late.
So, anybody else would have any other question?
What are you professor of?
Economics and statistics. Yeah, I'll tell you one last story from Sicily, since you seem to like the Sicily. My dad's name was Paul, and he had a cousin named Paul. In the Sicilian naming conventions, you're always named after your grandfather. So their grandfather was Paolo, so they both cousins would have had Paul as the name, right? Well, my dad, they knew that he was a medical man here in America, was a dentist in America, and that's about all the village knew. But Bad Paul, after my grandparents left, he became associated with the mafia, and he was involved in stealing the 3 properties from my grandfather and grandmother. And he ended up with a villa out in the countryside. A villa would be like a great big country house with an estate and up on the top of a mountain, okay? And he got that villa. And so the townspeople, the village people, they labeled my dad Good Paul, and they labeled this guy Bad Paul. Because in Italian, they never forget. They never forget. They had a king that was named Roger. I know Roger doesn't sound like an Italian name, but he was a Norman king. And they had Good King Roger and Bad King Roger, and they talk about him that way, father and son. The father was bad, and the son was good. Guess when those kings were? 1500 and something. And I said, you still remember about Good King and Bad King Roger? He said, oh yeah, the village never forgets. So back to Good Paul and Bad Paul. So he took this village away, the villa. Okay, my dad was here raising his family. Margaret Mary was here. Well, as it turned out, an earthquake happened in Sicily, and it shook the living daylights out of that villa and reduced it to rubble. And I've seen the rubble, gravel. Stone and concrete turned into gravel, all gravel for a whole area. And the villagers believed that was Mano del Dio, the hand of God, reached down out of the heavens and shook the village of Bad Paul, because Bad Paul had also been a murderer, but actually went to prison, and he served 20 years in prison. So when he got out of prison, he came back, lived in the villa for 1 year. God was busy with other stuff. And after he reached his hand out and shook that villa, turned it to rubble. So Bad Paul ended up with that. So we have Good Paul here and Bad Paul there. I'm wandering around Italy loose, and nobody knows who I am or anything. And I'm with my cousin, and a cousin that was another professor like me, but a cousin in Italy. And he introduced me to somebody, and the guy looked at me right away in Italian, and he said, are you from Good Paul or Bad Paul? I said, what? You know about Good Paul and Bad Paul? These people have been dead. This is 100 years ago. My dad had been dead 20 years already. And they were asking, are you from Good Paul or Bad Paul? And I didn't know what he said. I said, well, Good Paul. So afterwards, I asked my cousin, I said, did that guy say, was I from Good Paul or Bad Paul? I said, yeah, you answered right. He said, you're from Good Paul. I said, why did he ask that? And he said, oh, the village never forgets. It's 100 years old. They still wanted to know what about the Bad Paul? That villa has never been rebuilt. The villa's never been rebuilt. It's still gravel. I went to see it. It's all gravel. It's literally nothing. There's no rock bigger than about a football. And but it's interesting how the villages don't forget in the old world. It's different than America, right? After I'm gone on my farm, I don't think 20 years from now anybody will remember that I was living on that farm. Right? I don't think so. I don't think they will. But they remember Good Paul and Bad Paul. And the last part of that story is, so then we finally got my dad. He was always scared of the mafia because of what they'd done to his family. He wouldn't go back to Sicily. But we tried to explain to him the mafia knows that our money is in America. And here in America, we have security. But in Sicily, we don't have money. So that's okay. You can go to Sicily. They're not going to do anything to you if you don't try to claim back the property. So you go as a tourist, right? So he and my mother went as a tourist, and my brother and sister went with him. So after they'd gone to Mass on Sunday at the church where my grandparents were baptized and where they were married, they went to the city hall, and they were looking at records, and they said, my dad happened to say out of the blue, he said, have you ever heard of Good Paul and Bad Paul? And the city clerk goes, what? Like this? And he said, yeah. I said, I'm good Paul. And she said, yeah, well, I know who bad Paul is, but I've never seen good Paul because you've been in America all this time, right? So he said, well, is bad Paul still alive? Because we didn't keep track, we don't know anything. And she said, no, but the whole town was watching you on Sunday at church. And he said, why? He said, you were sitting in the pew next to Mrs. Bad Paul, who's still alive, and they were all waiting to see if you would turn to her when they have the kiss of peace and say, Pace, and say, peace be with you, because you didn't know that was Mrs. Bad Paul. He would not have known. He was born and raised in Boone, Iowa. So the whole town was watching, waiting to see what would happen in church, because Mrs. Good Paul was still there. But as it turned out, my dad didn't exchange more than just a passing greeting with her, you know. And my mother was there with him, and so we thought that was interesting. But good Paul, bad Paul. How they come up with stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, but to your degree in statistics, what's the probability of that?
I love probability.
Very good.
It's not intuitive, you know. So, you know, they all put in 20 cents at church. They contribute 20 cents in the basket. So I was there, and I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I thought, well, for once in my life, I've gone to the church where my grandparents were baptized and married. I could put in $100. I've saved money all my life. I could do that. So I asked my cousin, would that be okay? And he said, oh, no, don't put in $100. I said, why? He said, you put in 20 cents. I said, why? He said, watch, everybody put in 20 cents. So as I watched the basket, 20 cents is two little brass-colored dimes, like two little brass-colored 20 cents, 20 cents, 20 cents, all the way down the row. You know why? Because they're so different from us. They went through a period in Italy where they were forced to contribute to the church through their paychecks. And when you have a payroll deduction for the Catholic Church and you're not in a very good mood about that, it makes you sour. And you are sour, and will you put in money? Not like Americans. He said, no, you Americans donate to your church because you want to and you feel like donating, right? And you think you're doing a good thing and you want to. We do not donate to our churches. The government, it comes out of the government budget. And we said, we would not have the government in our churches in that way. And they said, yeah, that's different. I did put the 100 in, by the way, whatever that's worth. But I was so shocked that they had but the payroll deduction has now been gotten rid of. But many people still remember it. There are people that have worked their whole lifetime. They don't ever forget. Every week they get paid, they see a deduction for paying to the Catholic Church. It's not a good idea. So they all know that we Americans can do whatever we want, and some of us give $0 and some of us give $100, so they know that's okay. They understand that about us. But it was something I did not understand until somebody taught me there. So, okay, was there one other question? There's some other questions? Anybody have a question? My neighbors Cal and Molly are here. I put you guys on the stand, but on the spot, any questions from you guys?
Has she ever appeared to you?
Has she ever? No, she has not. She says, has Margaret Mary ever appeared to me? No, but she appeared to my dad and to my aunt. And we think that was very special. My dad had the famous story, if you sit for it, I'll tell you real quick. He saw an angel when he was 89. He was living in his house out in the country and had a stroke and had to use a walker. And he had trouble getting around, but he was still in his house out in the country. We took care of him. One of my brothers and sisters and I would stay with him all the time. One day, he calls up my brother Matt and says, I've seen an angel. And he was talking on the phone. Well, he couldn't talk on the phone because he couldn't hear. He had hearing aids and he couldn't hear on the phone. He could only read lips. He could read lips like a chant. And Matt said, well, how come you're talking on the phone, Dad? You haven't called me in 10 years on the phone. 10 years. He said, well, my hearing came back. I saw this angel, my hearing came back. So my sister came down from Minneapolis, took him to the hearing doctor, and the hearing doctor said, well, all the bones inside of his ear have turned to dust long ago. There's no bones in there. We think he must be hearing by his hairs in the ear are vibrating. And we don't know how he's hearing, but he's hearing. He can hear perfectly. So I drove up from Story City to Fort Dodge, and I tested him. I go in the other room and talk to him and say, give me an answer, and he gave me the right answer. So he said, stop testing me. I told you I can hear. Well, it gets better than that. We had hired a lady to take care of him, and my mother was dead by now, and we had built a closet where she could keep the sheets and blankets and stuff, because he had problems with, shall we say, kind of controlling his bladder. He's 89, okay? And we tore out the carpeting and hardwood floors in there for him. Well, then Luann, the lady that was taking care of him, comes and says, Paul doesn't need to have his sheets changed every night. They're all dry. And we went to him and said, what's going on? He said, well, I don't have any problems with my bladder anymore. The angel fixed that. Well, so then we took him to the urologist. The urologist said, well, the brain can't rewire. He's been having problems with his bladder for 15 years. He's 89 years old, and we don't know what's going on. We think he's probably making it up. So the urologist in Fort Dodge said he's making it up. Well, he lived for another 2 years. He didn't die till he was 91, and you know that he never again wore a diaper or had to have his sheets changed at night. All the closet that we built, all the sheets that we put in, all the diaper stuff that we bought, he didn't need any of it. So we were amazed at that. He said the angel was just a bright light that appeared in his bedroom one morning. And we believe in guardian angels, and he thought it was a guardian angel. And he said, the angel told me that, don't worry, I've taken care of you all these years. I'm going to keep taking care of you now that you're elderly and all your faculties have been removed. He could barely walk, he could barely talk, he couldn't garden, he couldn't hunt, he couldn't golf, he couldn't do all the stuff he used to do. And the angel told him that and then disappeared. He felt it was a male angel and a male voice. And he said, but I don't want you to tell anybody. He said, don't tell anybody. He called me at Story City. I said, Dad, I haven't talked to you on the phone for 15 years. We bought him one of those phones that's a magnifying phone. What do they call that? The amplifying phone. That didn't work. His hearing was just completely shot. But now he's calling me on the phone and we're having a conversation. He's 89. I said, I haven't talked to you for 15 years on the phone. He said, well, I can hear now. It's no problem. Don't make a big deal out of it. He said, well, don't tell anybody because they'll all think I'm crazy. If you tell people in Fort Dodge that I've seen an angel, they'll think he's a crazy old man living out in the country. And then he's made this up. So my family, my brothers and sisters, they nominated me to go argue with him because they thought that I did the best at arguing and say the reason for seeing an angel is you should tell people. There's a sacred reason why. It's to try to preserve people's faith and say, no, he's not crazy. If you want to think he's crazy, that's fine. Come out and have an argument with him, and he'll argue with you. But he's not crazy. And they said that they wanted me to convince him that the reason to tell people is to show, how would you say that? Who can put that better than I could put it? That you want to spread the... Testify, yeah, thank you. That's a good word. That's what I'm searching for that word. Testify that these things do happen. So after a week of arguing with him, I had made a couple trips up to a week, he finally says, okay, you can tell people, but I guess I don't care if they think I'm crazy. He said, Dad, they won't think you're crazy. We're just going to want to tell a few people. So we did tell people. He let us do that. But we think that was very special. I don't know if that had any connection to Margaret Mary. He didn't make any connection to Margaret Mary with that. We just think that they had a very unusual life, a faith life, that family, which included my dad. And that somehow that angel wanted him to know that he had been his guardian all those years and would continue taking care of him. And if you look back at his history about what happened to him and his family, he probably needed a guardian angel. And so he was right about that, right? But he lived out the last 2 years in his own home, out in the country, and did not have any hearing problems and did not have any bladder problems for the next 2 years. So we consider those as everyday miracles. I don't know how you guys would consider them, but we did. We went to a lot of work to rip all the carpet out of the house because I won't be too graphic, but there was issues about carpet. And so he said, no, we ripped it all out. I mean, I'm talking about room after room after room. It was a big house. So it turned out that he didn't need that, but we were happy for that. I'll never forget Luann, the lady who was taking care of him, was 72 years old. She comes to me one day, she said, in the morning, he's completely dry. I just can't understand it. I don't understand it. She was just shocked by that. But it was because somehow but the guardian angel didn't cure everything. So he's still an old man. He still had to use a walker, right? He still had trouble chewing or whatever old people, all that stuff, right? But these two things were the big things, I guess. Maybe that's why they cured the big things. I would hope that a guardian angel visits me someday, but no, to answer the question, whose question was that? I forgot who asked me. Have I ever had Margaret Mary appear to me? No, I have not. But she did appear to my dad and to my aunt. In the naming tradition of Sicilians, her name was Margaret. She took Mary at First Communion. They took a saint's name at First Communion. And that's because her grandmother was named Margaret in Sicily, Margherita. And when she died, the family names the next daughter after the dead daughter, in memory of the dead daughter. So my other aunt, who was named Serafina, was her name, which is a little angel. You know what a seraphim is? So in Italian, it's Serafina as a name. Her name is Serafina, but for the rest of her life, she went by Margaret because they named her after Margaret Mary. So there was two Margarets in that family. You name the living one after the dead one. That's their tradition. And they do it the same with men and boys. But you know all the family stories now. Any other questions that I can answer about it? Anybody have a question about the faith aspects of Margaret Mary? Do you have to, what do we do to prove up that it was real? Do we have to do that? I don't know how to do that. I really don't know how to prove up anything. I don't know if it needs to be, but
That's why we have faith.
yeah, that's a good way to put it, right? That's why I tell those sixth graders, that's why you have faith, because you can't prove these things up. You can't prove that my dad wasn't making that up. How do you know he wasn't just dreaming? Well, we asked him, we said, well, were you just dreaming? And he said, no. Well, how do we know that he's not making that up? You know, he had no reason to make it up, but we thought maybe he could have been dreaming, you know. But Margaret, back to your question, Margaret Mary did appear to people in dreams, and she gave them specific instruction about prayer, who to pray to, how often to pray, all that kind of stuff, and what she would do to help them. But how are we doing on time, Mrs. Principal? We're okay?
Well,
You went
Well-
over?
no, we'll end it. People can stay and continue to ask questions, but I just thank you very, very much, so.
Okay.